Hello and welcome to another episode of the WTI Talks. We have with us once again Mr. Hernandez. Thank you so much for being with us. He is the chairman of the Society for Low Carbon Technologies, and in the previous episode, we discussed this very interesting dimension of AI and energy. And in this one, we're going to discuss an even more relevant aspect of the energy security in Pakistan and what role will LPG that you and I and all the listeners use at our home and businesses have in Pakistan's energy security. With that, Mr. Hernandez, thank you once again for taking out time, and I look forward to learning a lot in this episode as well. So, just kicking off with the question, like straight away, do you think, and what do you think will be the future of LPG in Pakistan, like in energy security, energy mix? What are your thoughts?
I can see it proliferating. You know, I saw it yesterday when I was in the old city. Instead of having a filling station for petrol, you have the everyday individual filling LPG tanks. You know, when I say LPG tanks, the very small ones that you can use at cylinders.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's really showing how Pakistan is having to adapt from LNG to LPG. Now, I'll give you a quick techno-economic breakdown as to why LPG lends itself readily to this. It's because from a liquefaction perspective, and that's just a way to, especially in LNG, you have to make that molecule, which is natural gas for liquefied natural gas, very super chilled.
Okay.
And, you know, I could get very detailed, but I'll keep it top level. LPG doesn't require that, right? So when you have LNG and you distribute it, it goes directly into a grid. LPG can be moved around quicker and faster, which is why it's used in rickshaws or tuk-tuks or however people know these vehicles. But the same reason, LPG is also used for cooking in homes. I've seen it in other places, not just in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, where it was being used to cook. They disconnected, and then they used it for their rickshaw or tuk-tuk. So it's empowering the individual to have optionality in the market of what they choose to use. And in closing, when you're using natural gas, it goes through a centralized grid. Here, you're decentralizing and allowing the users to say, you know what? I'm not going to go through an entity that historically and traditionally has provided me my natural gas, especially when there's load shedding. What if I can do something about it?
Okay. And I'm going to pick on this centralized and decentralized grid point afterwards. But before that, you use very good terms, modularity and stackability, when you explained the characteristics of LPG. Can you explain what do they mean, what it entails?
Yeah, so when we look at modularity, it's another hallmarks of the efficiency of technology. You can put them as modules. You can have 5 modules, take one out. You're still operating with 4 modules, or install 4 more modules. So by that logic, a household can start to understand from a modularity perspective, we started with 8, but now you have that flexibility in the modularity. And so modularity is just a way of how you stack things, right? We typically look at stacking in a vertical way, but you can also do it in a horizontal way, right? So that modularity lets a household know that stackability. So they start to almost work as a very micro energy company, because if they've cut the cord from the entities that provide them the energy, and let's say they have, and if I may just quickly add this, if they have solar power at their home and they have battery and they have LPG, I actually know someone here in Pakistan, they'll go unnamed, that has this built in. So what role does the traditional energy company play if this household has become self-sustained by harnessing the world of energies, which is a beautiful world, but it's in the user's hand, and it's shaving off the middleman or middle person in this case, which would be, the utilities company. So what it does as well, it creates a more competitive landscape where the companies that traditionally provide these sources of energies have to adapt, evolve, or otherwise, because the user's doing it already in real time. And that competitive landscape naturally breeds innovations and efficiencies in the market.
Okay, and this also relates to the earlier point that you mentioned about, can you explain like what decentralized grid, like there is a grid and then there is a decentralized grid. It means like microgrids or something else?
Correct. So you're looking at microgrids, right? So when you have a centralized grid and the untold amount of kilometers of pipelines, right? That requires maintenance, upkeep, additional investment, expansion, so on and so forth. You know, that's the centralized grid because someone has central control over that. And with that comes additional costs. So when the Pakistani individual or anyone in any nation looks at their electricity bill, you're not just paying for the energy or the electricity or the natural gas. You're paying for the upkeep of these systems, but it's already baked into the price that you're paying. Now then, if a user decentralizes, creates their own microgrid, they know exactly what they're paying for from an end-to-end perspective, and they can have better control of these costs.
Okay.
So in the case that I gave you before with solar and LPG mixed in with batteries, you now have someone that's operating as a small energy company. So you proliferate that and you expand on that, and now you have the user or the consumer now operating at a much more rapid and efficient clip, and they're going to gain more market share. But what does it mean for the traditional companies that have provided this from a legacy and historical standpoint? It's going to create competition. Will it be an existential threat or crisis for these companies and entities? Rhetorical question.
Okay, and then follow-up question. I mean, do you find such examples of decentralization of the grids in the developed world?
We're starting to see a higher push for that.
Okay.
Anyone who's listening to this can see how it's being done for AI, but also Texas is looking at this as well. There's certain communities that are being planned in this way. Why? There was a calamity in 2021 that was the deep freeze. A lot of people lost electricity. A lot of people, the traditional historical entities weren't able to provide the energy as required. So now, and there's hurricanes as well in Texas, for example, and that has a pronounced and paramount adverse effect on the grid.
Okay.
So the traditional grid categorically failed in 2024 in Houston, to be specific. So we're starting to see people become more attuned to the fact that, just like you already seen in Pakistan with LPG, well, what can I do in my household to have better control of the situation? So there's these things called Generac. Generac generators are selling at a rapid clip after that storm. So why do I mention that? Because you can get a sense of the landscape and also quantify it from the purchasing power of people saying, if I have a Generac, so the Generac is basically a natural gas generator that you can control yourself. It's like LPG, right? Except it's on a bigger scale and it's a generator. But the overarching theme is that the users are becoming more, and the end user being the consumer, more intelligent. Not that they lacked it to begin with, but it's a augmented intelligence of how to build in resiliency for their own homes and communities by way of microgrids.
Okay, because this was going to be my next question, but you really hit the nail on the head. Like, so Generac has replaced like LPG cylinders, and the US that is Generac generators. That's correct?
So Generac has replaced the conventional entities that provide you the natural gas.
Right.
So if we look at the Pakistan parallel, the conventional way of heating your home, whatever the entity
gas
that
powered,
was, now that can potentially be replaced. And if it happens to go out at a very accelerated rate, like I said, I was in the old town of Pakistan and was just sitting there watching LPG tanks being filled by everyday person that was running like a business and operation. It was almost like seeing a petrol station for people carrying the cylinders, getting refilled, getting the weight, taking off the nozzle, and going.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask about this aspect because I feel a little bit queasy sitting in one of the near to one of these tanks and cylinders. But before that, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about empowering the end user. So even if it is that, but in terms of in terms of the supply dynamic, it is going to come from somewhere. So how much of an empowerment are we talking about in terms of LPG?
It's up to the user,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Because if you use it in a way where the price of oil is going up here too, right? For petrol. Someone may say, I want a rickshaw that can run on batteries. I want a rickshaw that can run on LPG. My house already produces solar. My house has access to LPG interconnectedness. I have battery storage. So now you're not just talking about a household having empowerment. You're talking about a value chain of someone having it all the way to mobility. And like I said, I saw this in Sri Lanka. Someone was cooking, took that same cylinder and put it in their rickshaw.
Modularity.
Correct. And that infrastructure of that modularity and that optionality, you can't just flip the switch on coal to oil to natural gas. But LPG allows you, so for example, if you wanted to cook with coal, you'd have to be digging or shoveling coal. LPG bypasses that. But it has a central thread, right? You have this thread and allows you to go to mobility. It allows you to go to cooking at home. And it allows you to do additional things as you deem accordingly.
Okay, so it's like an enabler in this regard. It's enabling people, the common man, to do a lot of stuff with the same source of energy.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the cylinders give it that modularity. You're going to only use what you require. You don't have to pay for a purchasing power agreement. You're just getting your cylinders and taking them straight to your home. And this is what it is called is a virtual pipeline. But virtual pipelines are usually kept to commercial vehicles. So a virtual pipeline is when you'll have, for example, you've seen them on the highway, like a big 18-wheeler hauling, petrol. Sometimes they also have industrial gases. It can be nitrogen, hydrogen, etc. But now the consumer is creating a micro virtual pipeline. So instead of having a physical pipeline, they can virtually move it.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, and it puts things into perspective. One thing that I was discussing earlier, you have explained how it is easier as compared to LNG for it to carry and the liquefaction of this. But in terms of other logistic challenges, because I as a person, I don't feel really easy sitting near to one of these cylinders. And I mean, are they prone to being used as something like that can blast, or it's easier to move, it's safe to move them across? How does that work?
First off, excellent question. Secondly, every energy system has inherited risks. I
agree.
Whether that's nuclear, whether that's wind turbines that have fallen, we can go on and on. Every energy system, unfortunately, has a weak point. Where there isn't weak points is where you have stringent HSC, and that stands for health, safety, and environment. So one thing that can be controlled psychologically and philosophically is to approach energy with an HSC perspective. What can I do to make sure that this is being done safe? So yes, I'm saying LPG has its benefits, but these benefits are only as good as the HSC component that is being utilized when handling or just taking this energy source for betterment or for utilization. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And in terms of, you mentioned this, we discussed it in the last podcast, wherein we discussed other usages of AI and energy, and SMRs came into the discussion, battery storages came into the discussion. And so in terms of LNG, like what you saw yourself in the old city, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, this might be like a very raw or very initial usage of this energy resource. If we are to envisage an advanced system wherein LNG is the main feedstock, what would it look like? Like there can be generators, or I mean, what will it? And we say, how will it look like? Will there be more equipments? It can be used more sophisticatedly.
For LNG or LPG?
LPG.
Oh, LPG is very flexible.
Okay.
Very flexible, because LNG, to go super chilled and do liquefaction, the economics, the technology, it's orders of magnitude higher.
Okay.
Here, someone can take an empty cylinder and just open up a nozzle and close it. With LNG, having maximum user utilization, it's way too complicated. You're working with temperatures and pressures that the normal layman or laywoman or layperson does not want to be around. So that's why LPG has this appeal. Obviously, it's quite evident here in Pakistan and also in Sri Lanka. Now, LPG, from a price point, is a bit price point higher than LNG, but it offsets that additional cost that can appear in the market, as we know the markets fluctuate. But even if there's a spread that makes the LPG higher a year from now, you're still going to have an inherited flexibility that LNG cannot give you.
Compensates for that.
Right, because if someone is living in a village, they can grab LPG. If someone's living in a very eloquent part of town, but there's load shedding and they're saying, you know what, I can't cook food today, LPG can come in immediately and compensate for that, right? So you have this optionality, you have this compensation feature that LNG just cannot do, right? Because when you compress, you're able to store more molecules within that given area, LPG giving you that in a way that is still techno-economically feasible and is not as hurdle-centric as LNG when you look at it from a user perspective.
Right. And another question that comes to mind is if like, for instance, some entrepreneurs are listening to it, or a person who wants to explore further opportunities, because you carry this practitioner's perspective as well, like what would your advice be? Like, how can we put this LPG opportunity to practical use in Pakistan? Like, what are the ways?
Look at the optionality. You know, the limitations are that of your imagination, right? And what I really liked yesterday is someone had this amazing cooking stove, one that I've never seen before. And and to be fair, you know, I've been in the developed world and the developing world, and the way they were cooking with that was just very elegant. I have a picture somewhere on my phone, and again, cooking with LPG is nothing new, but what I would say to the business person or just to the everyday person is when you use LPG, interestingly enough, the emissions are lower. It's lower carbon. So to a business person that wants to have a more sustainable future for their country, whether that's through return on investment on capital or return on investment on society, LPG is a lower form of energy that is more lower carbon. And then you have natural gas. But natural gas has always been said to be a transition fuel. It's only as good as the economics that allow the everyday person to purchase this. So the transition fuel in terms of natural gas, allowing us to go lower carbon, just holding on to that thread for a little bit, is that the developing world has shown that it's a transition fuel only if the economics make sense. So we're speaking about economics, we're talking about entrepreneurs, and somewhere in this discussion is that room for that opportunity, because the challenge is the opportunity.
All right, and the final question to put things into perspective properly, from coal and LNG and all of these things, how did we get here in terms of LPG?
With Pakistan?
Yeah, with Pakistan.
Well, natural gas, as we know, when the unfortunate Ukrainian conflict with Russia emerged, natural gas, 40% was lost by Europe. So the US stepped in, became the number one LNG exporter, held that title very quickly, very rapidly. There was so much demand pressure, not only on making up for the deficit that this conflict created, but also for the seasonal storage during winter that Europe needs. Now, when you're putting that demand pressure, it makes LNG cost more, right? Demand pressure, cost goes up. And at first, we saw LNG flows going to different parts of the world, but then we started to see this dynamic where developing nations were saying, well, from an economic standpoint, we're going to use coal. And we saw more coal utilization. So, and we're also seeing Pakistan deferring certain LNG shipments. Is the question because of LPG? Is it because of coal? Another rhetorical question for the user or whoever that is to answer. So that is how we got here, and how we continue to move forward is we'll see Pakistan, I would say, continue to use LPG even after this conflict delays and natural gas flows come back to the market in a more naturalized way, because there is more LNG projects being approved in Qatar and in the US, but the consumer in Pakistan may just say, I have this optionality, I have this way to be my own energy company, I have this empowerment and autonomy to the wayside with the macroeconomics and these flashpoints. Let me, as the user, use LPG, because, you know, where's someone going to put coal in their kitchen to move it with the shovel? Where are they going to... I think you get the point. You know, the infrastructure...
The logistics of it,
It's very, very cumbersome and very, very complicated. But again, even under this premise and this thesis of LPG continuing to be the way forward, potentially in Pakistan, we still have to remember it starts and unfortunately it ends with HSE. Health, safety, environment. That is the message. That is the key imperative. And that is how this nuanced way of energy utilization in Pakistan, and I say nuanced in a positive way, continue to go forward in a way that's measured, balanced, and safe.
Well, very well said. On that note, thank you once again for being with us today. And I'm sure that we will be able to do further recordings moving forward next year or even before that. Thank you so much, Mr. Hernandez.
Shukriya.
Thank you.